The empire of Kelthorn rose like a mountain of iron, its banners cast shadows over deserts, rivers, and endless seas, its rulers boasting that their dominion would last until the stars themselves fell from the sky. But on the farthest edge of this empire, in a quiet village hidden by forests, a girl named Alara lived unnoticed, her life marked only by the rhythm of harvests and the songs of her people. She had no crown, no sword, no destiny foretold, yet fate came for her in fire and steel on a night when the empire's soldiers descended without warning. The air filled with smoke as homes were burned to ash. Voices that once carried laughter were drowned in screams. Her world turned to ruin, and when the dawn broke, her village was silent, her people vanished without trace. Alara walked through the blackened remains, calling names that never answered, her feet carrying her to the old shrine where generations had prayed for mercy. She stumbled upon a broken floor beneath which lay a chamber long forgotten. Within the chamber, carved upon stone, were markings she could barely understand, yet the meaning was clear enough. Her people had not vanished. They had been taken by the empire itself. Sacrifices offered to keep a throne alive for centuries. Her hands trembled as she traced the carvings, rage and grief rising in her chest like a storm. The empire fed not on justice nor courage, but on the stolen lives of the weak and the silent. She fell to her knees as the truth consumed her, but from that despair came a vow, whispered first to herself, then to the silent stones around her. She would break the chain, she would not allow her people to vanish into shadows. She was only a girl, but she would stand against the might of kings. Her voice alone would become a flame in the darkness, and though the empire did not yet know it, its downfall had already begun. Alara left the ashes of her village behind her, steps heavy, but her heart burning with a fire that refused to die. She knew the truth she had uncovered was not meant for her alone, and that the stone carvings beneath the shrine told a story that stretched far beyond the ruins of her home. As she walked the long roads of the empire, she began to see the silence of its people in every village she passed. She saw men with hollow eyes, women who lowered their heads, and children who did not laugh, as though their very souls were chained by fear. When she asked about the vanished, they looked away. Some muttered curses under their breath, others simply turned their backs as if the question itself carried danger. But in their silence, Alara heard the echo of the same truth. The empire's throne was built upon their stolen lives. One evening, in a forgotten inn on the edge of a trading town, she met an old chronicler, his beard silver, his eyes weary with knowledge. He spoke in a whisper, telling her that the sacrifices had been made for generations, and that the empire had woven lies to hide its hunger. The priests told the people that the vanished were chosen for eternal glory, while the rulers drank their strength to bind the throne in shadow. Alara listened, her fists clenched, her heart aching at every word. The chronicler told her that others before her had tried to speak the truth, but they had been silenced, their names erased, their voices swallowed by fear. Yet he looked at her with a faint glimmer of hope, as though he saw in her something different. Alara swore to him that she would not be silenced, that she would carry the truth where no sword could cut it, and no crown could bury it. As she left the inn, the chronicler's words lingered in her mind like an oath. The road stretched before her, dark and endless, but she felt the weight of every vanished soul pressing her forward, and in that weight she found her strength. Alara's journey carried her deeper into the empire's veins, where the banners of Kelthorn hung heavy above the streets of a small border town, the air thick with smoke from forges, and the silence of people who walked quickly with their eyes lowered. The town had once been known for its music, its squares filled with songs at every dusk, yet now not a single note was heard. She could feel the weight of fear pressing upon the people, as if every stone in the street was bound in chains. She stayed hidden among the market stalls, listening to whispers, men speaking only in fragments, women warning their children never to ask about those who had disappeared. When Alara finally asked an old vendor about the vanished, his face paled. He looked around in terror and handed her a small carved token, whispering that she should leave before nightfall, for the night was when the soldiers came, and the soldiers were not hunting thieves or rebels, but those whose names had already been chosen. Alara kept the token close as the sun set and darkness fell across the town that night. She saw it with her own eyes. The soldiers arrived, cloaked in black, their armor glinting faintly in the torchlight. They moved like shadows through the streets, stopping before certain doors and dragging men and women out into the square. No cries were raised, no resistance given, for the people had been broken long before the soldiers came. But Alara could no longer stay silent. She stepped from the shadows and shouted that the Empire's hunger could not last forever, her voice cutting the stillness like a blade. Heads turned, eyes widened. The soldiers froze for a moment, and in that moment she felt the fire inside her surge higher than it ever had before. Though she was only one girl, her words lit something in the hearts of the people, flicker of courage that had been buried under years of silence. The soldiers advanced upon her, swords drawn, but before they could strike, the crowd stirred. A few voices rose, trembling at first, then louder, until the square filled with the sound. The Empire had tried to bury defiance. Alara stood firm, the flames of resistance born that night, not from weapons or crowns, but from the courage of those who remembered they still had a voice. Alara left the border town with her heart ablaze, for the first spark of courage had been lit. Yet she knew the Empire would not ignore her voice for long. As she journeyed further into Kelthorn's lands, the weight of its dominion grew heavier. Colossal statues of the emperors towered over crossroads, carved from stone and steel to remind the people that resistance was hopeless, and temples rose high with priests cloaked in crimson, chanting hymns that praised the throne as eternal guardians of order. But in their rituals, Alara saw the truth. Their chants were not prayers, but chains, binding the minds of the people. She hid among pilgrims and listened carefully, and she discovered that the priests were not merely servants of faith, but keepers of the pact that bound the Empire to the shadows. Each year at the turning of the seasons, chosen names were sent to the capital, not as tribute, but as offerings, the blood of the vanished feeding an unseen force that kept the throne alive. Alara's stomach twisted at every whispered detail, and the more she learned, the deeper the horror grew. She saw children being led away, their parents silent, with tears streaming down their faces, too afraid to fight, too broken to scream. The priest spoke of glory, but their eyes betrayed the fear of servants who themselves were trapped in a cycle older than memory. One night she followed a procession that wound through the streets, cloaked figures leading the chosen to a hidden chamber beneath the grand temple. What she witnessed chilled her blood. The chamber was lined with ancient runes that glowed faintly with a light not of this world, and at its center, great stone seat pulsed with darkness, each life taken added to its strength, feeding an empire that should have crumbled long ago. Alara nearly cried out, but forced herself into silence. She realized that the throne itself was no symbol of authority. It was a prison and a parasite, the heart of the Empire, and the chain around every neck. As she fled the temple, her resolve hardened. She understood now that this was not merely tyranny of men, but a darkness older and hungrier than kings. To fight it would demand more than courage. It would demand sacrifice. And yet, she swore that no matter how deep the shadows reached, she would drag them into the light. Her voice trembling but unbroken, she whispered into the night that the chains of the throne would one day shatter, and when they did, the Empire would fall with them. The Empire had begun to notice her whispers, traveling faster than their blades, spreading through villages like sparks carried on the wind, and soon the name of Alara was spoken in fear by the priests and in hope by the people it was inevitable that the empire would strike back one night as she moved through a mountain pass, carrying only the clothes on her back and the truth in her heart. The soldiers came. They descended like wolves, torches in hand, shields gleaming in the firelight. She fought to escape, but the numbers were too many. She was seized, her arms bound and her voice silenced with chains. The march to the dungeons of Kelthorne's fortress was long and merciless. Her feet torn, her body bruised, yet her spirit unbroken. When they threw her into the depths of the prison, she expected only darkness, but what she found was far worse. The cells were filled with faces, hollow and broken, men, women, and even children, their eyes staring but not seeing. These were the vanished, the ones? No. One spoke of left to rot until they were summoned for sacrifice. Their whispers filled the air with despair, but when they saw her, some spark flickered, as though even in chains she carried a light that the empire could not smother. Alara moved from cell to cell, speaking quietly to them, reminding them of who they were: not cattle for the throne, but people with voices and names worth remembering. At first they shook their heads, refusing to believe, but as the nights passed, her words began to take root like seeds in barren soil. She told them that silence was the weapon of the empire, and that even a whisper of truth could break stone. The guards mocked her, beat her, threatened her, yet still she spoke, and her voice grew stronger in defiance. One night, as the moonlight slipped through the bars, a riot stirred in the depths of the dungeon, prisoners rising, their chains clashing like drums of war. Alara seized the moment, striking down a guard with the weight of his own keys and unlocking doors. As cries of freedom erupted through the darkness, the corridors became rivers of chaos. Blood spilled, fire lit as torches fell, and shadows of men once broken rose like giants. Alara led them through the labyrinth, her voice carrying above the clash, reminding them that they were no longer vanished. They were alive, and their names would echo beyond the walls of this prison. Though many fell, though blood soaked the stones, they carved a path to the open sky. And for the first time in years, those who had been buried in silence breathed the air of freedom. The escape from the dungeon spread across the empire like wildfire, carried by travelers, merchants, and whispers that no sword could cut. The story of a girl who had defied the chains of Kelthorne and led the vanished back into the light became more than a rumor. It became a call, and wherever Alara walked, ice turned and voices rose. People who had long hidden their grief now found courage in her presence. Though weary and scarred, she did not falter. Instead, she spoke in the marketplaces, on dusty roads, in forgotten taverns, her words igniting sparks in the hearts of those who listened. She told them that the throne was not eternal, that it fed on their silence, and that their voices together were stronger than the empire's blades. Soon small groups began to gather around her: farmers who had lost their kin, blacksmiths whose sons had been taken, mothers whose children had vanished, each one carrying wounds, yet finding strength in unity. Alara did not call herself a leader, yet the people named her so, and she felt the weight of their hope pressing upon her shoulders. Still, she knew the empire would not remain idle. Its eyes were everywhere, its soldiers relentless. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the horizon burned red, she and her followers came upon a village in mourning. The soldiers had struck only hours before leaving behind ashes and blood. The survivors clung to Alara as if she were their last light. She promised them justice, and that promise bound her path with fire. But the empire struck swiftly in the night. A company of armored riders descended upon them, swords gleaming, shields unyielding. The clash was fierce, though the people had little more than farm tools and stolen blades. Their courage burned brighter than steel. Alara fought at their side, her voice carrying over the chaos, reminding them that they were not slaves. They were not silent. They were the storm that would break the throne. Though the battle was brutal, though lives were lost, the soldiers were driven back, fleeing into the darkness, their banners torn, their pride broken, and when dawn rose over the blood-stained fields, the people did not see defeat. They saw proof that the empire could bleed, and in that proof the flame of rebellion rose higher than ever before. The rebellion was no longer a whisper, it had become a storm that the empire could not ignore. Smoke from scattered battles curled into the sky like warnings to the throne, and the name of Elara spread through cities and villages, carried by voices that no fear could silence. Yet with hope came the shadow of vengeance. The empire moved swiftly, summoning legions of soldiers, their armor dark as night, their banners blotting out the horizon. When Elara and her followers reached the valley of Torval, they found themselves facing a sea of steel. Thousands of men marching under the command of generals sworn to crush the uprising before it could rise further. The people who stood at Elara's side were farmers, shepherds, artisans, their weapons crude, their armor more than rags, yet their hearts blazed brighter than the torches that lined the valley. Elara stepped to the front, her eyes burning with defiance. She spoke not of victory, but of freedom, reminding them that even if they fell, their voices would live forever in the hearts of those yet to come. The clash came like thunder, the valley shaking with the roar of steel against steel. The empire's soldiers struck with precision, shields locked, spears thrusting in unison. But the rebels fought with a fury born of loss and love. For every family torn apart, for every name vanished, they struck back. The battle raged through the night, torches falling, blood soaking the earth. Elara moved like a flame through the chaos, her voice guiding her people, her blade striking when needed. But her power lay not in steel, it lay in the courage she gave to others. As dawn approached, the valley was littered with the fallen, and though the rebels suffered heavy loss, the empire's army broke, unable to match the fire of hearts unchained. The generals fled, their banners trampled into the mud, and in the silence that followed, the rebels stood bloody, exhausted, but unbroken. Elara looked upon them with tears in her eyes, for she knew victory had come at a terrible cost. Yet within that cost lay proof that the throne was not invincible. The clash of shadows had torn the veil of fear, and the empire trembled for the first time. The empire reeled from the defeat at Torval, and across its vast lands the whispers of rebellion rose into a chorus. Villages that once cowered now raised their heads, and towns that had lived in silence for generations lit fires in the night as signals of defiance. Elara had become more than a girl, she was a symbol, a flame that no shadow could extinguish. Yet she knew that symbols alone could not end an empire. The throne itself remained unbroken, bound by the ancient pact she had seen carved in stone. To strike at it, she would need to face the heart of Kelthorn itself, the capital city where the emperor sat upon his cursed seat, feeding upon the vanished there. Strength, his strength. The journey to the capital was perilous, her followers wearied from battle, but their resolve unshaken. As they crossed rivers and forests, more people joined them, carrying little more than courage and grief. Yet together, they became an army unlike any the empire had ever faced. The capital rose before them, a city of towers and walls so high they seemed to touch the heavens, its gates guarded by legions, its streets patrolled by priests chanting to keep the people bound. In fear, Elara stood at the edge of the plain and vowed that the chains would be broken or she would fall in the attempt. That night, she and a small band of her closest allies slipped through the shadows, finding secret tunnels whispered of by the old chronicler who had once told her of the pact beneath the city. They found caverns vast and cold, lit by the eerie glow of runes carved in ages past, and at the center of it all, the throne pulsing with a dark light, as if alive. The air tasted of ash and sorrow, every beat of the throne echoing with the cries of the vanished. Elara felt her knees weaken, but her resolve hardened. This was the heart of the empire, the parasite that fed upon her people and chained the world in silence. Her allies looked to her, their eyes reflecting fear and hope in equal measure. She raised her hand and swore that before dawn the throne would either shatter or claim them all. The broken crown awaited, and with it the fate of the empire itself. Beneath the capital the cavern stretched, like the veins of a buried beast, each wall etched with runes that glowed faintly, with an otherworldly fire. As Elara and her companions moved deeper, the air grew colder, heavy with the weight of centuries of suffering, until they stood before the throne itself, a colossal seat carved from black stone, pulsing with a rhythm like a heartbeat, its glow rising and falling, as though it breathed. The sight stole the strength from their limbs, for they could feel the presence within it, ancient and ravenous, a darkness that had bound the empire since its birth. Elara stepped forward, her voice trembling, yet steady, declaring that no throne, no matter how powerful, could consume the lives of the innocent forever. The runes flared in answer, and shadows rose from the stone figures of those long sacrificed, their faces twisted by pain, their eyes hollow yet filled with sorrow. Her allies faltered, some falling to their knees in despair, but Elara refused to bow. She spoke to the shadows, calling them not slaves, but people whose voices still remained within the silence. She begged them to rise not as weapons of the throne, but as memories of freedom. For a moment, the cavern shook, the throne pulsing brighter, as if fighting to hold them in chains, but the shadows hesitated, their forms flickering, torn between obedience and release. Elara pressed forward her hand, touching the cold stone. The pain seared through her veins like fire, yet she held firm. Her voice rising above the roar, she told them that she was not their savior, only their echo, and that their strength was not lost, it was waiting to be claimed once more. The shadows stirred their cries, filling the cavern like a storm, their chains breaking as they surged against the throne. The darkness screamed, a sound that shattered the air. The stone cracked, splinters of black light cutting through the chamber. Her companions rallied, striking at the runes, their courage ignited by her defiance. The cavern became a battlefield of shadow and flame. Elara stood at its center, her body trembling, her spirit unyielding, knowing that this was the moment the empire would either fall or consume her forever. The cavern shook with the force of 1,000 storms as the throne screamed its defiance, shards of black light bursting from its core while shadows swirled in chaos, torn between bondage and freedom. Elara stood at the heart of it all, her body weakened, her breath ragged, yet her spirit unbroken. She knew that this was not merely a battle of steel or shadow, but of will. The throne had fed on silence for centuries, and it demanded her surrender. But she refused. She lifted her voice above the roar, calling not only to the vanished, but to every soul across the empire. She cried that fear was the true chain, and truth was the blade that could break it. Her companions fought desperately around her, striking down the guardians of the throne as the cavern cracked, and fire rained from the ceiling. The shadows surged toward her, some reaching with hands of despair, others with hands of hope. Elara grasped them all, her voice trembling, yet fierce, telling them that they were not forgotten, that every name, every life stolen was still alive in memory. The throne pulsed brighter, desperate to consume her, its dark tendrils wrapping around her limbs, dragging her toward its core. Pain seared through her, but she did not cry out. Instead, she drew strength from the voices that rose around her, whispers of the vanished, turning into a chorus, a storm of defiance. The black stone split, cracks spreading like rivers of light across its surface, until with a final cry Elara drove her hand into its heart. A blinding radiance burst forth, the throne shattering into fragments. The darkness within it, torn apart by the weight of countless souls freed at last. The cavern collapsed, walls crumbling as the empire above trembled, its chains broken, its crown fallen. Elara staggered from the ruins, her body scarred, her strength nearly gone. but her eyes alight with the fire of dawn. When she emerged to the plain outside the capital, the people were gathered, their faces turned toward her in awe and hope. They saw not a girl, but a flame that had defied an empire. She raised her hand, weak yet steady, declaring that the age of silence was over, and that no throne would ever again be fed by the lives of the innocent. The crowd erupted, voices rising together not in whispers but in thunder, and for the first time in centuries the empire of Kelthern knew freedom. As the sun rose, painting the sky with gold, Elara stood at its heart, her vow fulfilled, her people unchained, and the dawn of a new empire begun.